Hi, it's Dr. Maggie Perry with Tell Me What You're Proud Of. This is my second session with Jim, and we left off talking about his relationship with anger and how anger was any feeling other than anger was a challenging feeling for him to experience. So, Jim, do you want to just jump off right from there where we left off and tell me more about that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it had a lot to do with my childhood, and just kind of how I grew up, where it was, it wasn't explicit. Nobody said like you can only feel anger, but it was kind of shaped by kind of conditioning, where I'd get in trouble, or my parents would act a certain way if I acted sad or scared, and whereas if I acted angry, the way they acted was a little more accepting of it, I think. So just overall, that kind of shaped my ability to even name and label some of those other emotions, especially fear and sadness, and probably several others. But just so that was important early on, and still is, to be
If I
able
could
to.
sorry for interrupting, but if I could just slow you down there. So you mean even being able to label and name, like you weren't able to label and name
Yeah,
sadness and fear?
yeah, that's right. Yeah, no. So I remember early therapy sessions years ago, where they'd ask the question, and how did that make you feel? And I remember that always being a really, really tough question, because it felt hard to even say out loud, or to even think of the idea that I might have been feeling sad at that point in time, or scared, or embarrassed, or something like that.
How did you develop that language?
Yeah, so I kind of refer to it sometimes as developing an emotional vocabulary or something like that. And I think it came from, I mean, I really it took quite a while. I think it started to be I started to be more open to the idea, or um, more exposed to feelings in therapy years ago again, where it was kind of like baby steps at first for me with therapy, and since I started seeing you, I was a good little ways along that journey, so it was a little easier to make that kind of progress. But yeah, overall, it took a really long time to even kind of take the first step in that direction. I'd come in with oh, this happened, and the suggestion that maybe, and how did that make you feel? And my answer would be like really angry, and it's like, well, is there anything else there? And just kind of prodding, and eventually getting around to it. And then one day I kind of had an epiphany. It felt like, after I started working with you, where I kind of realized that, oh wow, yeah, no, it was like I was like, this thing that's bothering me, it's possible to feel sad about that. Um, like I gave the example of my work that I used to do, and then moving, and how I felt about that. That took a long time to process, and I kind of felt angry uh, about not being able to kind of achieve certain goals, and I felt angry at myself maybe. But after discussing that with you, I was able to tease out a lot more complexity in that kind of emotional landscape there. That I was sad that that being sick was presenting additional challenges, and I was scared that there's a lot of uncertainty around being the condition that I have, and so being able to confront that, being able to kind of cope with the fact that I had this chronic illness now, um, with emotions other than anger, that was really fruitful.
What was fruitful about it? Like, how did having a expanded emotional vocabulary reduce your suffering?
Yeah. So, like I said before, I was kind of almost in denial a little bit about the condition and its impact on me. I think when I think about it, I was so scared that it was easy to avoid that emotion and avoid thinking about it entirely. Um, and this is kind of like what was helpful about it was being able to get in touch with it at all. And by that I mean, I was so averse to the feeling of fear or sadness around the chronic illness that just trying it out, just getting close to it, and it was kind of like, see, it's not so bad, or that wasn't so bad, was it? The first time that I admitted, that yeah, it's scary, to have a chronic condition that you don't know which way it'll go. Like, that was really helpful because it was, learning basically slowly over time that, it's not the end of the world if I think about how scary it is, and that I can be in that emotion and actually kind of sit through the discomfort and feel it, and it's not actually as threatening as I believed it is, to admit to those emotions. That was all really helpful. It allowed me to process more of my feelings around my chronic condition, but just overall, it allows me to especially avoid anger because, like I said, a lot of times when I'm feeling those two emotions, especially, I feel like it got transformed into anger. So it was a lot easier once I got a little more comfortable saying I'm sad about this or I'm scared about this. It made it easier to not have those things turn into anger. Especially like in my personal life with other people, knowing what those feelings feel like, knowing what sadness feels like, knowing what fear feels like, and things like that. It's a lot easier to recognize those things when they're there underlying, and not let it develop into this case building and large amount of anger.
Great. And so now at this point, when you notice your mind building a case, what is that like for you?
It's easier to get in front of it. It's easier for me to just say, like, I know where this is going, and to basically choose not to do it. Like, my case building essentially is someone ranting, but in my own brain, like, oh, I can't believe they did this and this, and it's a rant basically. And so it's a lot easier to identify that pattern because it almost always means that some other emotion is there for me. So either identifying it or, and I don't always deal with the emotion right then, but it's easier to dismiss the anger. It's easier to go like, I probably haven't been wronged here. There's probably something emotional here going on that I'm don't feel like processing right now. And either A, I can try to process it then, or B, I can let some of the anger go, knowing that it's not actually anger.
Yes. So really well said. So I just want to comment on our process here a little bit in that you talked a little bit about your childhood, and I know reflection on how your emotional landscape developed from your childhood seems like it's been fruitful to you. I know that you've worked on expanding your emotional vocabulary. You have some different skills. How does the therapy process, how do you understand the therapy process, especially from like a CBT perspective? Because I would identify as a cognitive behavioral therapist.
Well, I think one big thing that's been helpful about this, I think for a long time, I had some perfectionism and some misconceptions about like what therapy was for, or at the very least, I had some expectations that might not have been all that fruitful. And so, in other words, I remember seeing therapists early on, and they'd ask questions about childhood and things like this, and I expected, and I don't think pop culture has helped out much with this, but I expected that what happens in therapy is you eventually discover the thing, and then things are better. And the thing I like about the kind of therapy that I've been doing with you is that it's really more about you're not trying to uncover some like big explanation, I guess, in terms of how your past, just all of that. What you're trying to do is basically develop skills, regardless of sort of of what may have happened in the past, or even kind of what's going on right now. Those skills actually, do you I think some modalities get it backwards, where you go back and you try to look at all these traumatic events and things like that without the skills. Whereas now that I've got skills, it's a lot easier actually to reflect about my past and about my present, if that makes sense. Like having the skills. Like I really feel like some of that childhood therapy stuff is probably not not a place to start, but is probably a place to finish.
Really well said. Can you expand on that?
Well, just going back to the example from before. I mean, if bringing up memories and things like that, and just thinking about your childhood and your family and culture of origin, it's like that's going to bring up a lot of fear, and it's going to bring up a lot of sadness. And if you can't even identify those emotions and process them and be able to sit with them and realize that it's not the end of the world if you feel sad for a couple minutes or scared for a little while. I think that makes it a lot more helpful to then think more deeply about kind of issues of identity and how did I get here, who am I, and what do I value, and things like that. So that was I spent a lot of years trying to go through that kind of therapy without really having the tools to even deal with some of the content that was coming up.
Okay, and can you tell me more about the tools, the skills, and the homework? Like what do you see as the skills and how you got there?
Yeah, that's another great example. It's like, I did some CBT before that had some homework, had more homework, and I would always feel really bad about not being able to complete it. And
Give me an example.
Like I'm going to, only spend 2 hours max on social media every day this week, and then failing it. And if I fail, so it'd be fine. I'd do it for one day, another day, but then if I failed, it was kind of all or nothing, and it was, it felt like I'd feel really bad about it, basically. But at that point in time, I didn't even have the concept of perfectionism, like clinical perfectionism. I kind of felt, I think I felt ashamed that I wasn't able to succeed, and I didn't kind of know some of the mechanisms around perfectionism and things like that were driving that feeling of shame and failure, and I think that impeded my progress a whole bunch, because every week I felt like I was kind of secretly failing alone, and that I couldn't talk about it that much in therapy for some reason.
Can you explore that a little bit? Why do you think you were secretly feeling alone?
I think that's kind of the mechanism of shame, right? Is that, I could have brought it up in therapy, but for some reason I felt like I couldn't. And that reason is that's what shame does, right? It kind of makes you want to isolate and not share the fact that you feel shame. So it would have been nice to have known those skills before I even started to do homeworks. Like I think there should be like a FAQ or a set of caveats that, like, hey, doing any homework at all, you might feel this way if you don't succeed, and that's probably just perfectionism, or there are significant caveats around doing homework that I don't think are laid out to people that are going to do homework, and you don't discuss the homework kind of meta process by default enough in therapy.
That's a great point. There's actually literature around that the one of the biggest reasons that people drop out of therapy, and especially exposure and response therapy for anxiety disorders, or also known as experiments, is that there isn't enough prep around why you're doing the exposure in the first place, and then also what you can expect while it's occurring. So if you're assuming that going into cognitive behavioral therapy, what's happening is that you're experiencing anxiety, you're avoiding in response, that's creating, maintaining, and intensifying your suffering. So what you got to do is go find like a therapy coach, basically, that is going to teach you how to do exposure, teach you to do the response prevention. All you have to do is do the homework perfectly, and then you're not going to have your anxiety anymore. Is that actually some version of what you were thinking when you started therapy?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, and even though theoretically that ideally could be the process, for most people, what happens as they start to do exposure is all their beliefs show up. So beliefs about needing to do it perfectly, or feelings of guilt because they have inflated responsibility of what it means to go towards whatever is anxiety provoking. They might have negative belief, like core beliefs about not being worthy or being hopeless or helpless, that suddenly pop up as they try to go towards whatever they're afraid of. So from my perspective, that's all part of the process. And shame, like you said, lots of people feel shame when they try to do something that's challenging or that they're not able to do perfectly. So from my perspective, that is what therapy is, that in the context of a safe and supportive relationship, you try out something new, and then you see what types of thoughts and feelings show up, and then you work to get more flexible around those thoughts and feelings, and then you modify the exposure so that you target the thoughts and feelings that continue to cause you suffering. But sometimes, that part of the process is either not explained or minimized or something like that. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah. No, I think it's an interesting thing. You come in. I feel like maybe for a lot of people, when you're in therapy, the expectation is, you're going to discuss things that are going on in your life, um, with someone, and that's kind of the main point of departure. But actually, therapy is something that's going on in your life, right? And when you first start, like the thing that brings you to therapy is, it might be acute enough, maybe you're having panic attacks or something, but it might be acute enough that that's not the issue that you talk about. But I do think that, at some point in the journey for a lot of people, that actually kind of breaking the fourth wall and having therapy about how therapy is making you, like having a discussion about how therapy is making you feel. In other words, that's a big part of your life too. And you're probably having, reactions to that, and you're probably having content around that. We do that sometimes in the groups with you. You'll ask every now and then, like, has anybody ever felt, has anybody ever done post, has anybody ever done kind of post-event processing about one of the sessions here itself? I think that stuff's really good. Like the meta is way underdone.
What's helpful about that from your perspective?
Well, especially with people who are anxious and maybe potentially have some perfectionism, emotional perfectionism, especially like the therapy process itself can become a source of content, I think, fairly easily. But there's this, and maybe it's cultural, but yeah, you never see anyone in movies talking to their therapist about the therapy itself. They're always talking about, their childhood or something like that. So, given that it's easy to become perfectionistic about the therapy process itself, it's kind of important to be open to the idea that therapy is not some sacred ground where you can't acknowledge that you're, where it's not allowed for you to acknowledge that you're in therapy, and that itself is a process, just all of this. Yeah.
And I would even expand on that's a perfect microcosm of what's probably going on in a person's life.
Right.
So feeling like you've got to do anything and everything perfectly, including the thing of trying to get better, is usually, or one of the reasons that people come in the first place. So if you can learn to talk about if you can get language around what's happening, talk about what's happening, and then be more flexible in your approach and be willing to take risks and be imperfect and sit with all the feelings that show up as you're doing it imperfectly, then you are starting to have the skills to be able to do that in other areas of your life too.
Exactly. Yeah. Like I remember when I first started working with you, there were the commitments. So I kind of like commitments a little better than homework, because initially I wanted to commit to everything and do it perfectly. And I remember, back then that I would go out of even if I made the commitment to do certain work, like I would do it even if I didn't feel good. Like, so it was a while before I realized that, flexibility is this huge thing and this important thing. And that that if I committed to something and then wasn't able to do it, that's not the end of the world. That is, that I need to be flexible even on that. And maybe maybe iterate and hone my commitment to something more manageable. But, that if you can't do the homework, if you can't do the commitment, that's okay.
Yeah. And what was the difference between homework and commitments from your perspective, even those words?
Yeah. Well, homework is loaded with a lot of baggage in terms of stress and things like that. Even a straight A student probably will have some negative associations with homework. And, very few of us were straight A students lifelong. So there are probably even more negative associations with the idea of homework versus a commitment. Probably some people have, that might be a loaded word for some people too, who have had issues with commitment. But yeah, overall for me, it was in terms of the word itself, I felt like I had more agency in the commitment versus homework thing. Homework suggests 1 hour dynamic, I guess. It's being assigned to you, versus a commitment feels more like, hey, it's a choice I'm making. It's mine. It's homework has a judgmental connotation. You're being judged on how well you do it. Commitment is you're the judge, and you can, sort of known that people can be harsh judges of themselves, but I feel like it's just a better framing overall.
Yeah, I really like everything that you're saying there. The homework implies that I'm assigning it to you and then I'm judging whether or not you're doing it well. Commitment implies you're
Right.
deciding what you care about, what you value, and you're committing to it in some
Right.
reasonable way.
Right.
And I appreciate what you were saying that if you overshoot, so if you commit to something that's not reasonable, just part of the process is learning that's okay. How can I modify to make myself
Right.
effective, knowing that effectiveness over time are reasonable commitments over time, or is the byproduct of reasonable commitments over time rather than trying to be perfect. So that's really good. Yeah. The other thing that I was thinking is even though the word commitment can have baggage for people, that seems like the type of baggage that's worth, I mean, maybe homework in some senses can also be something that you work through in therapy, but I think commitment is a really important one to work through because being able to make a decision and live in it is such an important part of adulthood and well-being. And so if you can start with something like, I'm going to commit tomorrow to staying under 2 hours on social media. And if I can make that commitment over time, I can also make other commitments like where I want to work or what, if I want to go back to school or who I want to date or be with long-term. Those kind of little commitments can add up and give you self-trust until you're able to make larger commitments that matter a lot to your life. Do you have thoughts about that?
No, I think that's really well said. Homework, homework failure is not actually possible in therapy, and that takes a long time to figure out. As long as you're going, there is no failure, but it does
Why
get
not?
early on.
Why is there no failure?
It's about putting in the reps. I mean, it's more like working out than winning a beauty contest, right? You win when you show up. You win when you persist. It's not like there's a singular moment of failure or success. It's a process, not an outcome. And so homework makes it easy to go into what I think is for me was certainly a default attitude about therapy, that it was a kind of endeavor of either success or failure rather than process.
Yes, that's wonderful. And I just want to expand on that is true for all conditions. So even though OCD is sometimes thought of as like either you do exposure and response prevention and your anxiety subsides, or you don't, that is still a process that is not linear. You can like most people, when they come to understand how anxiety and OCD operates for the first time, they do get pretty rapid relief in some parts of their anxiety, because all of a sudden they understand that some things are maintaining it, and if they stop doing those things, then they don't feel as anxious. And also typically understanding how subtly this process can be and how pervasive it can be throughout your life can take a long time, can take a lot of trial and error and a lot of persistence. And so recovery is very rarely linear. And I just appreciate the way that you're saying just showing up is succeeding in therapy.
Right.
Do you have any other thoughts about that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. And in awareness of our time, is there anything that's happening for you this week that you want to commit to?
Well, the social media thing might be a good idea. I kind of broke the spell on that last night, though, I think. But I was spending way too much time on it. I think I've got to give a presentation on Thursday. I think not over preparing for that is probably the best commitment, or the most useful commitment that I can make right now. And so making that more concrete.
Yeah, well, let's just talk about that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
In what way, tell me more about the anxiety that shows up when you give presentations and why you might have the urge to over prepare.
Yeah, I think one of the things that goes on is like a fear that I won't get it done, I guess. Like a fear that I'll maybe get sick and not actually finish it, or that I won't be well long enough to get it to a level that's not embarrassing, basically. That that other people will think that I've done next to no work, and I'll also feel bad that or I'll also feel worried that if I don't, that I will judge myself if I don't put in sufficient effort. So those are the kind of things that are kind of going on in the background. That I really want to prove to myself and to others that I worked really hard on this.
How do you feel as you describe those fears?
A little bit of relief, actually. Just being able to identify what's going on, because like I said, I sit here and talk like I'm at the end of this long journey, but I'm actually in the middle of it. For the last couple hours, I've been thinking, oh no, like I've been kind of stressing about all of my work, and whether or not it's going to be good enough and things like that. So this is always it's hard to like just dealing with that is probably a better expectation than expecting that I'll never feel that way.
Yeah, that's great. Well, when those thoughts were showing up, the like, oh no, what if this isn't good enough? How did that impact your behavior? Or like, what was your day like today, given those fears?
Well, yeah. So it was, it kind of is paralyzing in a way. It makes it hard to get work done, because I've got, not just this presentation. I've got like 3 different lines of work that I need to be doing, and feeling bad about each of them is, and worrying about each of them is not actually the same as acting, and is not actually the same as making any amount of progress. So, so kind of I've been kind of worried about that in the background, and I'll get a little bit of work done, and then kind of think about something else that needs to be done, and get stressed out, and then just go, distract myself from feeling stressed out with like social media or something like that.
How do you know you're stressed out? Like what shows up in your body?
Definitely like a tightness in the chest, a kind of darting, my thoughts kind of dart around, but mostly like a tightness in the chest and muscle tension and things like that.
And if you were going to stay with that feeling rather than go on social media, what would that be like for you?
It would seem scary, but I even now, like I'm feeling myself. I'm feeling a level of tension, ease in my body that I didn't know was there. Talking
Glad
about
to
it.
hear it. Yeah. So there's some part of you that before we were talking recognized, oh, I'm using social media too much. And oh gosh, I have the urge to over prepare for this thing on Thursday. But was it hard at all to tie it together? Like if we weren't talking, would it have been hard to maintain a commitment to not overperform or to not distract yourself with social media?
It gets, yeah, I mean, it definitely, this is nice because it brings it all into focus. It's definitely harder for me to come up with this organically, primarily because I'm so busy trying to avoid the feeling of worry about, being embarrassed or just, trying to avoid all of those feelings that, um, yeah, it's really hard to put it all together. I mean, if you're avoiding thinking about this thing, it's kind of hard to come to a realization about what's going on. So that's why, yeah, uh, that's why I find, discussing this stuff very useful.
Yeah, that completely makes sense. I think I'm on the same page about that. As you can kind of learn tools to try to minimize avoidance, and also sometimes just going towards something while talking is kind of the best way to minimize your avoidance. So again, as you notice what you're afraid of, does it still feel like a threat?
No, not as much. No, not as much at all.
Okay. Do you think it'll be hard to keep the commitment to avoid social media or to like put boundaries around your work in the next couple days?
It could be if like I encounter a significant roadblock. So it probably won't be now that I've anticipated that to an extent. But yeah, no, it definitely could be if I wasn't ready for that. So if something is like unexpectedly, 10 times harder than I thought it was going to be, that might be an opportunity to experience either a setback um, or to kind of think about my commitment and not avoid at that point in time and just process the feeling of, oh, well, this sucks, but like it's not the end of the
What
world.
is the feeling you'll have if it's significantly harder than you were expecting? What will you feel?
Probably fear that I won't be able to do it. Will be the biggest one. It'll amplify some of the fears that I have, and the maybe some shame that like I didn't start on things earlier and things like that.
As you notice that it's fear at that time, does it feel courageous to keep working?
No, I mean I never think of it that way, but that seems like it would potentially be a really useful way to think about it.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
if you're scared, like that's what courage is,
Right.
doing
What do
something
you
in the
call it?
face of fear.
Yeah, exactly.
So rather than beating yourself up about everything that you did wrong to get yourself to this place, or feeling shame about potentially failing, as we've discussed, doesn't actually exist, then if you go with like, if I'm feeling fear, then I'm acting courageously, it's great that I'm staying with this regardless of the outcome. Overall, that attitude will help you succeed over time.
Yeah. Great.
Okay. Well, then it sounds like a good commitment. Why don't we end there? Thank you for your time, Jim.
Yep. Thank you.